we're going through a start to finish installation manual for a 30-foot internal light tap system. We're going to start the video by showing you how to get your foundation installed, how to get it leveled out, how to get the bows built on the outside of the structure, get all your framing done, your plastic built, your ventilation systems dialed in, as well as your light deprivation system. Got our foundation completely lasered in. The next step was to assemble the trusses on the ground, hoist them and drop them into the sidewall post to get them secured to the foundation. Now, we assemble the trusses on the ground with our truss splice here. Now, this is our 2-foot splice, which is actually used for the internal frame. On the external frame, we have a smaller eave, so we only actually use a 1-foot splice. So it's the same exact material, just half the size. Now, when we install this up on the greenhouse, we grab this about center. It doesn't have to be perfect. We slide it in, and we install 2 tap cons through the truss. Now we want to install them on the side of the bow, because we don't want these screw heads to interfere with the plastic or any of our hardware when we're attaching our purlin in our next step. So grab halfway, put it in. We use our 3/8 head self-tapping screws. We put 2 in on the side of the bow. We keep it at least 1 inch from the center offset. So center 1 inch over, 1 screw here, 1 screw about 3 inches from there, just to make sure it's nice and secure. We insert the other side of the bow. They engage here. We put another screw on each side. And then you're ready to set them up. You drop them into the sidewalls. The next step of the process is getting the end walls framed, plumbed, getting our ventilation rough openings all done right to size, getting everything squared off so that all of our transitions are even, going from the outside structure to the inside structure, our doors framed out, all the channels ran, and we're getting ready to run purlin in our next step. The first step to the end wall framing process is to true up all of your uprights. Now, on your blueprints, you'll see 3 center columns that are actually getting cemented into the ground, and that's your main stability for your end wall system for the internal and external system. Now, as you'll see on this middle column runs all the way to the center of the structure, and it's sleeving over top of the 1 5/8 tube. Now, that 1 5/8 tube has the same principle as the internal frames, where we have a male to female connection. It sleeves over the top and just serves as a footing for every one of our uprights. And we've got our center upright, and then we measure from outside of this center upright to outside of our upright. And that's supposed to be 7 feet. Now, the reason for that is so that when the door completely is open all the way, that's exactly 7 feet, that it stops at the edge of this plane and opens completely. Now, once we have all these uprights framed up, we true them up to our internal system, and we'll show you how to do that next. So my favorite way to true these uprights up is just to use a 24-inch framing square. Now, if you have one of our larger models that have 3-foot spacing in between the structures, you'll need to use something a little larger. You could use a drywall square or a larger framing square, you know, or you could use this with a little extension on it. But really, the main principle is we're going to run this square in the inside frame where our ventilation is. We're gonna make sure that the back side of this framing square is flush with the base plate of this internal framing. And all we do is mark it out, run it, mark it, and then we just run our end wall upright vertical from there and plumb it up to the top of the framing and secure it with our double brace band connection up top, and move on to the next one down the line. And as we move down, we just want to make sure that our measurements are staying the same, and we're double checking. We want to make sure that this distance is still, in this case, 60.5 inches, which you'll refer to your blueprint for, because that's all dependent on the size of your ventilation. Right now, I'm standing right where our intake shutters are going to be and our light traps to allow airflow to get inside this internal frame. So in this case, we have a 60.5 inch rough opening by 60.5 inch for our 60-inch light traps with our 60-inch intake power shutters. So So the next step after we've got all of our uprights gone up, we showed you how to plumb them from the inside to outside frame. We're gonna get into installing all of our pre-cut horizontals that go in between the uprights that actually make all the rough openings for our doors, our ventilation systems, and really actually complete the end wall package. So the first thing I always do is I start with my door and I work out, just start from the center of the structure. In this case, the customer wanted just an external single man door. We usually provide a sliding door that goes over the face of this, so we're gonna kind of disregard this portion of the end wall framing because it's sort of irrelevant for this package. So we've got our 80-inch header here. Now, the door's actual size is 84 inches by 84 inches. Now the framing we supply you is 2-inch by 2-inch square stock. So we make this 80 inches because when it's spanning in between this, you add 2 inches here, and we're adding 2 inches here, which creates 84 inches. Now we measure from the top of the header to the bottom of the plate here. And we want to make sure that that's also 84 inches because we want that door, when it's sitting here, to go outside to outside of all of our rough openings here, so that way the door is completely sealed against the structure for light deprivation or just for climate control, to make sure air is not penetrating through gaps or anything like that, or wind can't get behind it and cause your door to blow off its track. We want to make sure that when it's open and closed, that it's making complete contact either to this plane or it's coming all the way open and making contact with this plane and holding itself shut. Now, once we've got that all framed, we throw our 80-inch here, we secure everything with our 90-degree brackets. It's all framed out. We move along to our ventilation rough openings. Now, I like to start from the inside of the frame and work myself out because every greenhouse ends up a little bit different, and we really want to try to get this inside framing as tall as we can for our ventilation because there's not a lot of room to work here. So we start with our header. We get it up as high as we can towards the brace band within reason. We've screwed this all together. We've worked our way down. We've attached the bottom of our framing to our 60.5-inch rough opening. And now that that's done, we can actually level out to the other side. I always start with the bottom and work my way up. So I really just throw a level, 24-inch level or 36-inch level, whatever you've got access to, on my internal bottom cross member, and I level out and I mark and I install this, and I do the same thing on the opposing side. Mark and I install my other bottom cross member for my external ventilation. Now this creates it so we've got a perfect rough opening that's completely in line with each other from the internal to the external, because we're going to have ducting that needs to transition in between. If they're off, it's not going to allow the ducting to really seal properly. It's not going to allow the transition from the light trap from the outside to meet the intake shutter on the inside in a clean motion. So we want to make sure that this is done perfect. It's probably the most critical part of this build, to make sure that your ventilation is actually sealed properly and you're not sucking air in from the inside in between the frames, or you're actually having gaps or light leaks in between the two structures and you don't end up having to tape everything and make a mess. We want to get the end walls trued up before we move forward to our step, which is going to be installing the purlins, and we can do that a few ways. So, common practice, we're gonna throw a level on here. In this case, we're already pretty dead nuts, so we don't need to do much adjustments. The building's actually pretty square because we're starting on a nice level pad. Now, if you had installed your end wall and the framing was still swaying a bit and it wasn't really sitting level, we actually can brace this out with a couple different methods. You can run a 2x4 on edge to a grade stake on the ground and kind of get the whole thing plumbed up, or you can attempt to do it with our corner brace system while we install it. So the corner braces are pretty simple. We work ourselves from the ground, which the purpose of is to get this energy transferred. So we get the bottom of our first piece of our corner brace installed and it gets brace banded. We run it on a diagonal up here. We've attached it with another brace band connection. Now this sturdies up these two posts and allows this to kind of act as a as a nice sturdy point to push that end wall forward or back when you're installing your final cap and brace band to the end wall. So you can actually use this once it's secured to here to really sort of adjust this to getting this plumb, and you can just kind of work your way there, do it on the opposing side, get this thing trued and plumbed up, and then once you're good, we can work our way to the next step, which will be installing those purlins, so that way when the purlins start, they're actually meeting a flush surface and we don't have a kind of a discrepancy in the distance in between the bows moving down the structure, and we keep this whole thing perfect. So I like to start with the baseboard, and I like to work my way up the structure as I put my purlins on. So the baseboard's pretty simple. 2x6 bottom board. You know, if there wasn't a pad here, we'd want this here to back gravel into. We also have it here to screw the channel wire lock into, which we'll show you in our next step. But really the main idea here is you got your baseboard ran, you've got your 2-inch rigid pipe straps, and you've got your wood lags that are provided, which is just a 3/8 hex slotted screw. And all we're really gonna do is attach the wood board to the ground and run it level from the highest point of the structure all the way to the other end, secure it with our 2-inch pipe straps, and you're done. After that, we're gonna measure up, and as we showed you initially, we had all the top of our pipes cut level with the transit. And what's nice about that now is it's giving us a nice line to work with to install our eave plate, which is either going to be a piece of purlin provided by us, or you can actually do this with 2x4. Now, 2x4 is going to be more common if you're trying to do roll-up sides on an external frame, or if you're doing just a blackout system on our internal light depth, which would need passive ventilation from the outside to cool it. In our case, both these structures are sealed, so this is really just acting as a purlin to give this greenhouse structural integrity. And the customer wanted to go with purlin instead of 2x4 just for aesthetic reasons and longevity. So same principle applies. We've got the top of our cut mark here. We've installed our 2-inch rigid pipe strap. We've tap conned it each side of the piece of purlin, and we've thrown a screw right through the back of this strap. And what that did was it actually served a dual purpose, where we've locked the purlin in place so this thing will never be able to move. And we've also locked the bow into its place on the column so that that can never move during any type of wind or any type of interaction with weather. It's gonna always stay sturdy there, and the greenhouse is never gonna get out of place. Now that's done. Now we're moving up to our ridge purlins, and this is a little different. So we've got that purlin on the outside of the structure because we're trying to keep these planes the same. Once the plastic kind of crests over this radius here, it's gonna crest over this tube and come down flush. Now we've worked our way up. Now our mid-center purlin goes underneath the frame. We don't want it above the frame because when the plastic's coming down, if it was above, it's gonna cause bellying where rain can develop, snow can develop, and it's gonna make it a real pain during the harsh months to clean your greenhouse off. So we followed the same principles. We ran a string line down the structure to keep it true. We attached our 1-inch pipe straps. We've secured them on both sides of the frame, and we've thrown a set screw through it just to keep it from shifting. And we made sure we maintained our 5 foot on center, moving up the structure. Once we had that secured, we moved on to our center ridge. Now our center ridge has a different approach. Now the pipe strap actually is perpendicular to the truss column because we don't want to have to screw through that union. We wanted to come perpendicular through it to be able to just screw into the purlin, or you're gonna have a really hard time attaching that because you'll be screwing through a bunch of different layers of metal because it's right where the two bows meet. Now, in the earlier video, we showed you the importance of keeping your screw heads apart, and this is why, because that pipe strap right up there needs to fit in between those 4 screw heads and not be in the way of that getting mounted, so you won't have to take screws out while you're getting to that step. So there's a seam at the top of the structure where the two bows meet, and we've got that piece of purlin just sitting right on that seam, and that allows you to not really have to measure up there. You can just run that piece of purlin right on that seam, attach that strap to it, and it's going to be dead nut center the whole way down the structure. And then we work our way down and we repeat those same practices that we showed you initially on that side, down this side, and we end up with 2 baseboards, 2 eave plates, 2 mid-center runs, and our ridge punt of purlin ran on top. And then after we're done with that, we're ready to finish doing our purlin framing for our internal frame. We want to make sure that we don't run our internal purlins till after the outside ones are done, so that way they're not in the way while we're trying to get them in. It'll just make your life a lot easier. Now with the internal frame on this model, we're going to follow the exact same procedures we did on the outside. The only difference with this model is that the customer opted to do a double channel base on the bottom of the structure. Now, I mean, with lumber prices being the way they are, this is an economical way to save a little bit of cost. It's the double extruded channel that's just a little bit more rigid than single base, and it allows you, if you don't need to back gravel up, to install this directly to the structure without the need to purchase lumber and purchase channel to attach the plastic. This is a one and done system. You screw it to each post of the building, you span in between, and you're ready to wiggle wire right after you pull the plastic, and we're good to go. So once again, this doubles up as a baseboard and the channel wire lock. One and done deal. We move our way up. We actually skip the eve plate on here because there's no roll up sides on this. We just have clear plastic coming down the frame, and then we have our black plastic. There's no need for an eve plate here because we have nothing getting attached right here. We just move all the way up. Now, if that was the case, we would actually use our center purlin on this structure, our mid-center. We would drag it down and we would put it on the outside of this frame if we were doing a roll-up side with the clear plastic on our internal frame, but that's not very common. So we repeat the same practices that we did on our external frame with our internal. We run our baseboard, we move up, we run our purlin mid-center underneath, we run our purlin over top of the center of the frame, running it center on the seam. We repeat it, moving down here, bottom mid-center purlin, moving to base plate, and once we're finished with that, we're ready to install all of our channel base for the structure to get ready to install plastic. We've got all of our framing complete now, and we're getting to the last step, the exciting part that actually turns us into a house, and that's installing the channel, installing the plastic, and turning this thing into a greenhouse. So what we're doing now for our next step is getting all of our single channel, and we're running it along the entire top of the framing of the end wall, starting from the bottom, running our screws every 18 inches. I mean, you might have to punch something in between to start making these angles. We're running right over all of our brace band connections that are connecting all of our purlin runs and our corner braces, and we're making our outside attachment point for our main cover for our greenhouse plastic. So we're essentially putting this channel on the rough openings and the perimeter of the entire structure, starting with the outside frame and working our way to the inside frame. So the outside frame is pretty simple on this. We really just have to go up and over the outside bow and down the baseboard. Now, we want to make sure we either install this channel in the middle or on the top, because when you're installing your clear plastic, you don't want to be digging your hand into the ground or the dirt every time you're trying to put a wiggle wire in. You want to make sure you have enough room to really exercise this wiggle wire, which we'll show you in the next step when we get to installing the plastic. We just want to make sure we're not driving our fist into the cement while we install the plastic, because it'll make your life miserable. It'll get done, but it'll be terrible, so we don't want to go down that road. And that's it for the external part of the frame. We'll show you the same thing on the internal. We've installed our convenient double channel on the base, so we're done with that. We don't have to install any channel here. All we really need to do is install the channel up and over the bow. And that's it for the outside part of this frame. Very simple. And then we move on to installing the channel to the rough openings on the end wall. Now, with the end wall framing, the channel follows the same principle. We're really just running it on the outside perimeter of the frame and the rough openings for the fans. So with this going on here, we've got our single track. We've ran it along our entire bottom plate, and we've ran it to our outside edge. Now, we really just run the channel to our outside edge here so we have something to nail to. It's really not necessary. When we run our end wall plastic, we're actually going to stop it about here, and it's just going to feather off here when we go to tuck it in before we pull our main tarp, which we'll show you in a minute. So single channel on the bottom, and then we just run it around the rough opening of our exhaust fan, and your end wall channel is done for the fan side. We'll show you out on the other side how we do it for the shutters and how we do it for the door, following the same principles. For the end wall framing on this side, we've got our exhaust fan system. The same exact principles applied that we did on the end wall side that had our shutters and our door. This side's almost simpler because we really only have one rough opening for our exhaust fans. So we follow the same principles. We installed all of our end wall uprights. We squared them off to each other to make sure that they were all in line. We used our pre-cut square stock that's provided for your cross members. We installed them down the entire structure. We put our supports in for our exhaust fan. We framed out our exhaust fan completely with the exception of the internal upright for the framing for the light trap. Now the reason we had to do that is because we're gonna have to actually sneak our exhaust fan in through the inside of the structure to install it before we move forward because of size requirements. So we'll get that done. We'll show you that in the next step after we pull our end wall plastic. So the same thing applies on this side. We've got our light trap rough opening. We've got our power shutter rough opening. All we really have to do here is install our channel base along the outside of our rough openings on our inside frame, as well as our external frame. Now, we wait to install this till we install our light trap. And we're gonna end up locking in the light trap with the piece of channel at the same time, which we'll show you later. So we wanna skip that step for the time being. We only wanna install the channel on the internal frame completely, and we wanna leave the external frame empty around here until we get that light trap installed, and then we'll show you how we attach it all together in one shot. All right, so now that we got our first layer of plastic installed on the greenhouse, which was our exterior end wall plastic on the fan side of the building, that was our first step. So we wiggle wired it in around the entire perimeter where we showed you where we had our channel wire lock installed previously after we finished our framing. Then we came on the inside like we showed you and we pulled the fan through and we got all of our fan installed. We did that just to make it easier to get this big fan installed here. We left the cone off for the time being. We left the cage off on the front. We wanted to leave exposure here so the electrician can come in and get his work done. Once the electrician's finished with his work, then we'll go ahead and we'll install the cone on here. We'll install the cage and this fan will be wrapped up. Once this was all finished, we're gonna move on to the inside. We're gonna get our internal blackout plastic pulled for our other end wall, show you how the light trap was installed and the transitional ducting between that light trap and this fan to make sure that we show you properly how the ventilation is going to be pulling from the inside of the building and going out and not pulling from any of the dead space, because that won't keep your garden cool. We've got the interior end wall cover pulled. Now we make sure the black's on the inside. We don't want it on the outside because we don't want it attracting heat. We want to keep that on the inside. We've got the white on the outside, on this side here. We got it completely wire locked off, so it's completely finished. No other work's needed. We started with the top, tacked it, got the bottom pulled tight. We got it as good as we could. And then we were ready to install this light trap. Now, the light trap was pre-assembled on the ground. It was all put together, ready. It was nice and structured with our sheet metal housing. We installed it inside of our rough opening, and we secured it with a few self-tapping screws, just for the time being. When we're finished up completely, we'll end up putting a few more of these every 12 inches down the line, just to make sure this is all sealed properly, so that'll be all tightened up. We've got our fins running vertical. That helps with the airflow. It keeps the least amount of static pressure on the fan, helps your motor stay healthy for a long time. We don't have any burnouts on it. And then we were ready after this to go in and install our ducting in between the two frames. So our ducting consists of 4 pieces. We've got our 2 large 90-degree sections that actually make up the actual duct. And then we've got 2 corner pieces where the 2 ducts meet. So we've got 2 90-degree connections. They come together, and we've got a corner piece right up there to seal that gap there, and we've got another corner piece at the bottom, and that creates our actual duct that's installed onto this building. So when we installed the light trap, what's nice is we've got the light trap extending in between this building about 10 inches here. So we've got all this nailer room, and you see the duct right here hasn't been screwed off yet, so I just wanted it loose so I could show you guys this in between here. So we came in between here with these ducts, we threw them in. We have the flange side connecting to the rough opening for the exhaust fan because we needed to connect to something. Now, this end is just completely a straight cut. Now, if for some reason your foundation got done wrong and this didn't fit correctly, you could trim this down as long as it's making contact with this light trap and we can screw off to it. That's the most important thing because obviously air is getting pulled through this building, going through this light trap, carrying through this duct, exiting through that fan. So we pulled the light trap through, we put one 90-degree piece on, we installed the other 90-degree piece, created the duct, we installed our corners where the seams are, screw them in, self-tapped it into place, and then we'll continue going down the line. We'll self-tap the rest of this into place, and then we'll tape the seams with HVAC tape just to make sure we don't have any little cracks or gaps where other air would be sucked in through this internal area, which is going to be a lot hotter than inside the actual greenhouse, and we don't want that hot air getting pulled through here instead of from inside of the building. For our final step in between the frames here, we've installed the mounting point for our guide pipe swivel bracket. Now this guide pipe swivel bracket is what holds this telescoping arm which connects to the motor. That motor is going to connect to your curtain, which is actually going to roll up and down, light deprivate the greenhouse. So this is the last step we need to do in between these frames before we're finished up working in here. Now this shows why it's so crucial to have our outside bottom cord for the framing for our exhaust fan and the framing for our light trap to be level with each other, because we have this cut piece right here which is about 2 feet and we've got it secured in between both frames, and that acts as our pivot point for the motor to roll up and down. Now we secured this off, we made sure it was square in between this point, so we threw a speed square in between here just to make sure this was trued up. If this was on an angle, it would cause the motor to travel incorrectly, so we have to make sure that this is squared up perfectly to the frame. It's more crucial for it to be squared up on this side than this side because this is actually what's tracking. So in our case, it was perfect on both sides. We didn't have to worry about it, but if you get into a situation where you have to choose, always choose this building to true up to, because this is your pivot point here, and this motor is traveling on this building. It's not traveling on this building. This is just for protection. It's not for anything functional. So we've got this going on. We've secured it here, we trued it up. We installed our guide pipe swivel bracket to here. We're approximately 8 inches to 12 inches off the building. We don't really want to be past 12. The farther the motor is off the building, the more weight it's putting on the actual roll bar on the outside, and it will cause it to roll unevenly. So we want to have that nice happy medium where it's far enough from the building where the motor can't get too close, potentially rub on the building, cause an issue with the roller. We don't want it too far away where it's going to actually affect the roller's ability to stay true as it goes up and down the structure. All right, so we're gonna go through the steps and processes to get your intake side of your greenhouse dialed in. Now, it's slightly different than the other side of the building, whereas we already had the exterior greenhouse plastic pulled first. In this case, we do not. We only have the interior greenhouse plastic pulled because this is the last step for the structure, is doing that because we actually need this access way right here to get our tube fed in for our drive tube for the light deprivation system to roll up and down. So for this case, we leave this open. We want enough air inside the building. We want that room to get the pipe in, so we do not do this. This will actually be the second to last step before we're completed with the build. Our first step was to assemble the light trap and install it from the outside going in, and we double up installing this channel and we use it at the same time to actually secure the light trap to the building. So we put our light trap together, follow the same principle. We keep the verticals, the vanes running vertical. We installed it into the building. We used our channel Wirelock track at the same time to just install to the building around the rough opening, and this part was done. Now, once we were finished with that, the next step was actually to install the duct from the inside, and we'll move around in there and show you how that's supposed to be installed, which side the flange is going to be on, and which side the shutter is going to be on. All right, now this part's going to be a little hard to see because we already have the shutter installed, but the principle you can still see. So the flange to the actual ducting was put in ahead of time, so it was put in from the inside, and this flange was connected to here. So we came in from the inside, we installed the ducting, the flange made it up with this outside framing correctly. It sat there. We brought it through and we let it sit on top of the light trap, which we'll show you in the next clip. It went through and just sat on that light trap housing. Same principle that we had before with the fan. We have the non-flange side of the ducting connecting to the light trap because we have that exposed housing, and we've got the flange connecting to the rough opening on the inside. Now, we'd like to just put them together at the same time, so we installed this, and then we installed the shutter right after because we can install flange to flange connections here and self-tap them at the same time so you don't have extra screws. Now, if you wanted to do them separately, you would just have to make sure that you install this duct in here, and you just have to make sure that your screws are on the outside so that the shutter flange is not being, you know, influenced by that, and it's not sitting out proud, because we want to make sure that these are flush. Now, once that's completely installed, we actually install our shutter motor assembly, which is just this guy here. It's a pretty simple thing to install. There's instructions inside the packet that show you actually how to install this, but essentially it's, you know, 4 parts. You've got your mounting bracket that connects to the center vane. You've got your motor that connects to the mounting bracket. When we install this to the center vane, we want to make sure that the screws coming through are not ever getting in the way of these vanes opening and closing. As you see, this has free movement. It's not hitting any screw heads. Now, if you mess that up for any reason, and that does happen, just come in with an angle grinder, a cutoff wheel, and zap those ends of those screws off, so that way your vanes of your shutters are not hitting those screws and you can move forward with the project. Now, after that, we just install the key. You run it up, you install it to the 3rd or 4th hole down, install your change to it. This will open when the motors turn on for the fans. Your electrical system's going to connect in between your shutters and your exhaust fan. When power gets given to it, these shutters are going to open, allow air to move through the light trap, pull through the greenhouse, and go out the exhaust fan and cool the structure when it gets too hot. All right, so the duct, as we talked about before, is coming from the outside plane here, coming from the inside of the structure connected with the flange there. It's running out, and we've got the light trap housing protruding again here, and we've got the straight edge non-flange sides of our ducting connecting to this light trap, and we're just going to screw it down the line here to connect, add our corners to our connection points on each side of the duct, and you're finished up. So we've got our interior sliding door for our light deprivation system. The installation of this interior light deprivation door is going to be identical to the installation of the exterior door, with the exceptions of the brush seals that are going to get installed around the outside of the frame of the interior door, as well as the fact that this plastic's obviously the black and white membrane because it needs to be black out, and the external greenhouse door is going to be clear because we actually want light in. So the parts of this door are the door frame itself. We've got just regular handle just to push and slide. We've got our stay roller on the bottom. We've got our trolley rail up top, which is connected in the center here with our splice plate. Now when you get your package and you open it, you'll see one of these hangers has 2 nuts on the top, and those 2 nuts are to connect each of these 8-foot pieces of trolley rail. The other 2 hangers don't have any nuts on top, and those are for installing on the outside. Now when you install these guys, you're going to install it approximately 6 inches from the top of your header to the top of the bracket, and that'll give you right about the right height there for this guy to hang from properly. Now you can adjust that as much as you need to because we've actually got plenty of adjustment here. We've got a long bolt that hangs through this door about 8 inches, so you've got about 8 inches of adjustment you can work on there. If for some reason you have to hang your trolley rail up higher, there's always a solution, so we can run out, do that. We had our door completely plastic, obviously, before we hung it. We brought our door in, obviously, before we installed the external plastic because we had to be able to get this thing in here. If you install your external plastic first, ahead of time, you're not gonna be able to get that in here. You're gonna be fighting it the whole time. So, crucially, you get this done ahead of time before you finish the build. Then the only final thing we got here, as we can show you on this far side, is our door catch on the bottom, which we'll show you right after here, and we'll show you the brush seals on the other side. So these brush seals are what are actually keeping this door from being light proof. They might need to be adjusted depending on how the door is hung, but the basic principle of them is pretty simple. Once your door is completely framed and installed, you've got your brush seals, which are a 2-piece system. You've got this track here that it comes with, and you've got your brush. Now, before you install these, you actually have to, you know, cut your track to size, cut your brush to size, slide it in, and then you'll have all these little pre-punched holes in the track that sort of guides how many screws you need to put in there. And we're gonna actually put this on the perimeter of the door with the brushes facing in. And we want these brushes facing in because when this thing's completely closed, we want these brushes to be making contact with our header, with our jamb, and with our threshold. And that's gonna create a proper seal as long as all those brushes, when we're finally closed, are making contact with that entire door framing. So when the door is completely closed, we'll have it slid shut. It's gonna hit the stay roller on this side to keep it sucked to the building with the roller, and it's gonna keep it snug tight with the catch. That catch is slightly angled out, so it's gonna catch it wide, suck it in, make sure that this thing's completely sealed, and we'll look around for gaps when we're finished off to see if we need to make any adjustments to those brush seals to make sure we're getting all those little gaps, all those little like leads tuned up, and we're gonna be finished with the door after we're done with that.